April 15, 1943. High above the gray waters of the English Channel, the morning mist clung to the wings of a formation of strange new fighters crossing into occupied France. They were enormous, almost comical in their bulk, broad-bellied beasts with radio engines that roared like distant thunder. To the veterans of Jageschwader 26 waiting on the ground at Abbeville, the radio call came a note of amusement. Achtung, Amerikaner kommen, they are flying barrels. Laughter crackled across the frequency. Barrels. Fat, clumsy American barrels that would surely fall like stones the moment a sleek Focke-Wulf or Messerschmitt closed the distance. The Luftwaffe had ruled these skies for 3 years. They knew every weakness of the Spitfire, every hesitation of the Fortress gunners. These new Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, fresh from factories across an ocean the Germans could scarcely imagine, looked like a cruel joke sent by a nation that had never truly tasted European war. This was the moment the air war over the Reich began to tilt, though no one yet understood it. For nearly a year, the 8th Air Force had thrown its heavy bombers against the continent with only the thinnest veil of escort. Spitfires could reach the coast and turn back. The bombers flew on a lone, bleeding altitude and cruised over Wilhelmshaven, over Bremen, over targets whose names became synonyms for slaughter. By early 1943, the daylight offensive was on the verge of collapse. The Luftwaffe still possessed thousands of experienced pilots, factories buried deep in forests, and a doctrine honed since Spain and Poland. What it did not possess, what it could not imagine, was the industrial river that was already flowing from Detroit, from Farmingdale, from a country whose factories never slept and whose workers believed the war could be won by sheer, relentless output. The P-47 was the first physical manifestation of that belief. 17,000 pounds fully loaded, nearly twice the weight of a Bf-109. A Pratt & Whitney R 2800 radial engine that produced 2,000 horsepower and then, with water injection, 2,500 more. And in its wings, 8 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, 4 to side, each capable of firing 12 rounds per second. 8 guns. Not the elegant twin cannon and twin rifle caliber arrangement of the German fighters, but 8 heavy, belt-fed American machine guns, synchronized to hurl a wall of lead no European designer had ever contemplated. The sound they made in testing had shaken the ground at Republic's Farmingdale plant. Pilots called it the voice of God. On that April morning, the laughter did not last long. The Thunderbolts climbed to 25,000 feet, higher than most German interceptor preferred on a cold spring day. Then they turned for home. A swarm of FW-190s rose to meet them, confident, aggressive. The Americans did not turn into the attack as Spitfires would have. They held course, then rolled into dives that accelerated past 500 miles per hour. The Germans followed, and suddenly the sky filled with tracers. Not the delicate stitching of 20 millimeters cannon fire, but a solid, roaring sheet of orange red lines that seemed to come from everywhere at once. One Focke-Wulf simply disintegrated, wings folding like paper. Another trailed fire and spun away. The radio chatter turned from mockery to confusion, then to alarm. By the time the Thunderbolts pulled out low over the channel, the first confirmed kill of the type belonged to Major Don Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group. The laughter had died in German throats. What the Luftwaffe encountered that day was not merely a new airplane. It was a new philosophy. Where German fighters were knives, precise, lethal, fragile, the Thunderbolt was a sledgehammer forged in abundance. Its pilot sat behind 18 cylinders of air-cooled radial engine, armor plate, and a turbo supercharger the size of a small car. It could absorb punishment that would tear a 109 apart and still bring its pilot home. And when it attacked, those 8 guns spoke with a voice that carried across the sky like rolling thunder, a sound that would soon become the harbinger of defeat for every German pilot who heard it. The transformation was swift and merciless. In May, June, July of 1943, the big American fighters appeared in ever greater numbers. At first, the Germans treated them with contempt, climbing to meet them in the old way, expecting the familiar turning duel. They learned instead the American tactic. Height, speed, dive, a single devastating pass with all 8 guns harmonized converge at 300 yards, then zoom climb back to altitude using energy no liquid-cooled fighter could match. The .50 caliber round, 13 grams of steel-jacketed death traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second, was not the explosive shell of the MG-151, but when 8 guns fired 400 rounds in a 2-second burst, the effect was the same. Wings came off, cockpits shattered, fuel tanks erupted. German pilots began to speak of the Amos in hushed tones. If you see the 8 streams of fire, one veteran advised younger pilots, break off. Do not try to follow the dive. You will not survive the zoom. By August, the Thunderbolt groups were escorting bombers all the way to the German border. Dropped tanks. First crude British paper tanks, then pressurized American belly tanks, extended their radius. The bombers no longer bled alone. Over Schweinfurt and Regensburg in that bloody month, the Luftwaffe threw everything it had left against the formations and paid a price it could not afford. On Black Thursday, October 14th, 60 fortresses went down, but so did nearly 100 German fighters, many to the guns of the escorting Thunderbolts. The writing was on the wall. Experienced pilots were being culled at a rate the training schools could not replace. Fuel grew scarce, and always, high above, the big radios circled like vultures, waiting for the moment to strike. The sound of those 8 guns became the recurring nightmare of the Jagdwaffe. Pilots spoke of it the way sailors once spoke of the roar of a broadside. It was not elegant. It was not precise. It was simply overwhelming. A storm of lead that arrived without warning and left only burning wreckage falling through the clouds. To the men who flew against it, the sound represented something larger than any single airplane. It was the sound of a continent mobilized, of factories that ran 3 shifts, of a nation that could lose 5,000 aircraft and simply build 10,000 more. It was the sound of abundance made lethal. Robert S. Johnson of the 56 Fighter Group survived 21 direct hits from a Focke-Wulf 190 in June 1943. Cannon shells had shattered his canopy, punched through his armor, and still the Thunderbolt flew. His attacker, out of ammunition, could only salute in disbelief before breaking away. Johnson landed his shredded fighter, counted the holes, and flew again the next day. 27 victories would follow. Francis Gabreski, another Thunderbolt ace, took his toll until the very end, finishing with 28 before the Mustangs fully took over long-range duties. But it was a jug that broke the back of the Luftwaffe in 1943 and early 1944, when the issue was still in doubt. Captured German pilots, interrogated after the war, spoke of the Thunderbolt with a mixture of resentment and respect. Heinz Barr, 96 victories against the Western Allies, called it a beast that could absorb an astounding amount of lead and had to be handled very carefully. Adolf Galland, inspecting a captured example, simply shook his head at the sheer excess of it all. The armor, the engine, the 8 guns that never seemed to jam. One Oberleutnant asked what frightened him most in the late war sky. Answered without hesitation. The sound. When you heard the 8 guns, it was already too late. In the end, the Thunderbolt flew more than 500,000 sorties, dropped 132,000 tons of bombs, destroyed 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armor vehicles, and over 7,000 enemy aircraft, half of them in the air, half on the ground. Its loss rate was the lowest of any fighter in the European theater. 0.7% per mission. For every Thunderbolt loss, nearly 5 German fighters fell. The recurring sound of those 8 Browning machine guns was more than weaponry. It was the audible proof that the war of scarcity had met the war of abundance, and abundance was winning. It echoed across the Reich from the Channel to Berlin, a rolling, roaring reminder that a nation could build not just weapons, but hope itself into steel and aluminum and high-octane gasoline. And when the final surrender came, when the once mighty Luftwaffe lay in smoking ruins across 1,000 shattered airfields, the men who had flown the sleek gray fighters with the black crosses understood at last what that sound had truly meant. It was the sound of freedom, not the delicate freedom of poets or philosophers, but the raw, industrial, unapologetic freedom of a people who believed tomorrow could always be built better, stronger, and in greater numbers than yesterday. 8 guns, speaking as one. A storm of lead that washed the sky clean.